Hello everyone. Today's story took place in France on the 5th of October 2017. Nestled in the heart of southern France, the house of Daniel and Françoise Malgouyres was located on the estate known as Jardin de Saint-Adrien in the quiet commune of Servion, part of the Hérault department in the Occitanie region. This property, once a quarry site, had been transformed into a sprawling landscaped garden, famous for its beauty and tranquility. The estate lies just outside the centre of Servion, between Béziers and Pézenas, easily reached via the D18E4 road or the nearby A75 highway. It was here, in this seemingly serene setting, that the shocking events unfolded, events that would later grip the nation and shatter the Malgouyres family. Despite its picturesque surroundings, the house became the centre of a criminal investigation, proving that appearances can be deceiving. What seemed like a peaceful, idyllic estate concealed tensions, secrets, and ultimately a dark betrayal. Daniel and Françoise had been a harmonious couple for 40 years. They had 2 children, a daughter, Aurélie, and a son, Olivier. And money was never a concern. On the contrary, they had achieved great success thanks to their immense passion for gardening. Daniel was a self-made man. Born in Servion to a modest family, he left for Belgium in search of opportunity. There, he worked in a restaurant and met Françoise, a Belgian woman who would become the love of his life. Together, they founded a furniture company that flourished, earning them financial security and respect. After a decade of success, they decided to return to Daniel's childhood village and build their dream home on a plot of abandoned land, a former quarry, barren and rocky. For 6 years, the family lived in a caravan while painstakingly transforming the rugged terrain into a lush, green paradise. Over time, they created a breathtaking garden with ponds, fountains, and exotic plants. It became a family project. Their children, Olivier and Aurélie, helped, and friends often joined in, turning the estate into a symbol of their hard work and devotion. In 2003, the couple opened their property, Les Jardins de Saint-Adrien, to the public, hosting themed events and equestrian shows. The gardens quickly became a regional attraction. Their joint dream matured over years of labour and passion. The garden earned the national title Jardin préféré des Français in 2013. In the village of his birth, Daniel turned his childhood vision into reality, converting a landscape of rock and rubble into an enclave of beauty. Françoise stood by him as both spouse and collaborator, their lives and careers intertwined with the garden and with each other. The couple was proud of what they had created, and their life seemed idyllic. Now, both in their 60s, they could finally enjoy the fruits of their labour. It was the 5th of October 2017. Daniel and Françoise were sitting down to dinner, a seemingly ordinary evening. Around 8 p.m., their dog began barking frantically outside. The day before, a young wild boar had wandered onto the property, so Daniel decided to step out and see what was happening. No sooner had he stepped into the yard than 2 men emerged from the shadows. They lunged at him without warning, tackling him to the ground and raining blows down on him. On his knees, bleeding and in agony, Daniel screamed for help. His cries carried inside, and Françoise rushed out, only to be confronted with a terrifying sight. 2 masked intruders, dressed entirely in black, loomed over her husband. One of them turned toward her, and she was immediately grabbed and restrained. The Malgouyres were now victims of a violent home invasion. The intruders forced them back into the house. Fear-stricken, Françoise and Daniel obeyed. The men began shouting, demanding to know the location of the safe. "Where's the safe? Where's the safe?" they repeated relentlessly. Françoise, trying to protect their hidden fortune, denied it existed. "You know very well we don't have a safe," she insisted. Strong-willed and determined, Françoise refused to yield to their threats. Attempting to placate them, she offered a small amount of cash, a few €100 lying around the house, but the intruders were not interested in small change. Frustrated, they became more violent, shoving Françoise and striking Daniel across the head. Duct tape appeared in their hands, a clear signal of what they intended next, to bind the couple. The situation was spiraling toward deadly consequences. Acting on instinct, Daniel lied, claiming a bag of valuables was upstairs. Crawling up the stairs on all fours, he drew one of the assailants with him, while the other dragged Françoise behind. On the upper floor, Daniel spotted a hunting rifle perched atop a wardrobe. Gripping the weapon, he fired once in the dark, the bullet hitting the man near the doorway squarely in the chest. The intruder collapsed instantly, dead. Daniel turned to the remaining assailant, shouting, "If you kill her, I'll kill you." The man released Françoise, threw her to the ground, and fled into the night. Daniel chased him outside, calling for Françoise to trigger the alarm and contact their daughter, Aurélie. Panicked, Aurélie answered the call and immediately sent her husband to the estate. Pretending to be a police officer, he shouted, "Gendarmerie! Gendarmerie!" as he entered, hoping to frighten the intruder. Inside, he found Daniel covered in blood, still clutching the rifle, and Françoise in shock, trembling, terrified, and barely able to speak. Moments later, the gendarmerie arrived, quickly securing the estate and scouring the grounds for the second intruder, though he had already vanished into the night. Blood stained the floors and walls, a grim reminder of the violence that had unfolded. Paramedics and a forensic doctor were called in to confirm the death of the first attacker. Daniel recounted the harrowing events, insisting he had acted out of fear for his life and for Françoise's. In that moment, he was certain they would not survive the night. Investigators collected fingerprints and DNA from the deceased, hoping to identify him and perhaps track down the accomplice still at large. As for the motive, the picture seemed clear. The Malgouyres were wealthy, prominent in the region, and their fortune had likely made them a target. After the fatal break-in, Daniel was taken into custody, a standard procedure after a death. His story of self-defense seemed plausible, but investigators needed every detail. Meanwhile, the news spread fast, and public opinion in the region was overwhelmingly on Daniel's side. Nearly 200,000 people signed a petition supporting him. Upon his release, Daniel recorded a video reenacting the events to explain to the public why he had acted as he did, to defend his life and that of his wife. Visibly shaken and emotional, he described the assault in detail, showing where he had been attacked and how he had grabbed his rifle in desperation. Meanwhile, investigators identified the dead burglar. His name was David Vierre, a 43-year-old father of a family from near Perpignan. He was known to police for minor offences, but nothing serious. His wife, questioned by detectives, was stunned. She said she had no idea he had been involved in such a crime. She explained that they had financial troubles and that David sometimes played poker to make money. David's sister, Cindy, was devastated by the news. She described him as a cheerful, kind-hearted man, a loving father, not a criminal. She couldn't believe he'd been involved in such an attack. For the investigators, identifying the accomplice, still on the run, became a priority. They analysed David's phone records from the day of the burglary and soon found a crucial lead. They connected a certain Richard Bruno to David through a poker circle in which both men participated. By connecting all the dots, the investigators began to wonder whether Richard Bruno could be the second man, the burglar who had managed to escape. They began looking into this man and discovered that he had no criminal record whatsoever. He was a married father with a stable life, a completely ordinary person, not at all the profile of an experienced criminal. So how could these two men have organised such an attack? Determined to get to the bottom of the case, the gendarmes moved to arrest Richard Bruno. From the moment he was taken into custody, he protested his innocence. But a crucial piece of evidence soon surfaced that would change everything. Days after the attack, a burglar's balaclava had been discovered in the Malgouyres garden. The balaclava was sent to forensic experts, and their report arrived just hours after Bruno's arrest. It contained his DNA. Confronted with this irrefutable proof, Bruno finally admitted he had been the second man involved in the break-in. Initially, investigators had treated the case as a straightforward home invasion. With Bruno's arrest, they believed the matter was resolved. Yet, the story took a shocking turn. Bruno's confession reopened the investigation and sent shockwaves through the region. He revealed that the attack had not been random. Richard Bruno said that he and David Vere had not acted on their own initiative. Instead, the burglary had been carefully planned, allegedly at the direction of the property owner himself, Daniel Malgouyres. Richard claimed he did not know Malgouyres personally. It had been David Vieres who acted as the intermediary. The plan had been presented as an easy job, promising a large sum of money to both men. Investigators were stunned. Richard provided additional details about the couple's private life, claiming that Daniel Malgouyres had a mistress and intended to run away with her. This raised questions about whether the alleged affair could be connected to the burglary. Two details in Richard's testimony particularly drew the investigators' attention. He said that just an hour before the attack, he had seen Daniel on the property with his dog. The dog, recognizing Richard as a stranger, began to approach him, but Daniel called the dog back. Lawyers for David Vere's family noted that Richard insisted the owner must have seen him and had the opportunity to act differently. If Daniel had not been complicit, he could have called the police, defended himself, or allowed the dog to respond. Richard's account seemed convincing, and the investigators pressed him further, trying to reconstruct the events of that night. He explained that Françoise had tripped on the stairs and that he had tried to steady her. Contrary to Daniel's version, neither he nor Françoise had gone upstairs. Richard stayed on the ground floor with her. These statements directly challenged Daniel's self-defense claim. The investigators began comparing testimonies and noticed clear discrepancies between Daniel's and Françoise's versions. Daniel had said that when he fired, one burglar was behind the other, threatening Françoise with a gun. But Françoise insisted she had never gone upstairs. She had tripped, the first intruder had gone up alone, and she had remained downstairs. This detail was critical. If Françoise was not in danger at the time, Daniel's story of shooting to protect her was undermined. Investigators saw the inconsistencies as a turning point. The image of Daniel as the heroic saviour began to unravel. Françoise's account aligned with Richard Bruno's, not her husband's. She also recalled being puzzled by one moment during the assault. Daniel had directed the burglars toward her safe, a safe she had never shared with him. The safe contained her own money, and she had no intention of giving it to anyone. She had already been a victim of theft in the past, and this time she resisted. Another detail stood out. Her dog, which had previously barked and raised the alarm, was suddenly absent during the attack. No one could explain where the dog had gone or how it reappeared. The missing dog, Daniel's insistence on the safe, and the contradictions in his story cast serious doubt on his account. Had he been lying from the start? The gendarmes moved to take Daniel back into custody, this time quietly, to verify Richard's statements. When he was arrested, he protested, insisting he was the victim. But as investigators confronted him with Richard's testimony, he confirmed details only the intruders could have known. This suggested he had seen the attack coming. Questions turned to his personal life. Investigators asked about the alleged Brazilian mistress. Daniel admitted he had fallen in love with a woman who worked for him in the garden, Yolanda. He claimed she was Colombian, not Brazilian, a minor detail at the time, but one that would later prove significant. Investigators also learned that 5 months before the break-in, Françoise had suffered a severe horse-riding accident that left her in a coma. Daniel described how, after her recovery, their marriage had deteriorated into constant arguments and tension. By summer 2017, their relationship was strained. Over time, Françoise also began recalling unusual details she had previously overlooked due to trauma. While they were tied up in the living room, Daniel had whispered to her, asking her to reveal the location of the safe. Moreover, she was puzzled that their well-trained dog had not come to their rescue and that its whereabouts during the attack were unknown. It seemed possible that someone had deliberately secured the dog somewhere beforehand to prevent it from attacking the intruders. The burglars themselves could not have done this, as they would have been attacked. The dog obeyed only its owners. It was also unclear why the intruder went upstairs with Daniel unarmed. Perhaps that had been part of the plan, intended to collect his share there. But maybe not everything went according to plan, and, for example, he began threatening Daniel that he would reveal the details of the scheme to his wife, leading to his death. Françoise admitted that she had learned about her husband's affair. Daniel demanded a divorce, which she naturally agreed to. The couple had already begun dividing their finances, with each taking control of their own savings. As the investigation progressed, a startling possibility began to emerge. Authorities started considering whether Daniel had orchestrated the entire break-in himself. The theory was that he may have planned the attack to gain access to Françoise's property and money, anticipating a difficult divorce, and to create a chance to start a new life with his mistress, Yolanda. Slowly, the picture of a husband plotting against his own wife began to take shape. The focus quickly turned to money. Daniel's repeated insistence on opening Françoise's safe now appeared highly suspicious. Police launched a thorough search of the property, determined to uncover any hidden cash that each spouse had kept separately. Under pressure, Daniel eventually disclosed a secret hiding spot. To the investigators' astonishment, he revealed that he had stashed money in the garden. Buried in the soil, inside ordinary jam jars, were neatly stacked banknotes, €50 and €20 bills crammed tightly together. The total amount approached €100,000, a sum that seemed almost cinematic in its concealment. Authorities questioned why Daniel hadn't simply shown the burglars the money during the break-in. He explained that the stash was buried at the far end of the garden, and he feared venturing there while the intruders were still inside the house. The search for the elusive safe continued. It was eventually found in the garden shed, but the money the burglars had supposedly targeted wasn't inside. Françoise revealed that she had already entrusted her savings, another €100,000, to her son for safekeeping prior to the divorce. Daniel had been unaware that the safe was empty. By the end of the search, investigators became convinced that Daniel had the clearest motive for the staged burglary: the theft of his wife's funds. He was formally charged with murder and attempted theft in connection with a premeditated plan. News of his arrest reverberated through the family. Aurélie, Daniel and Françoise's daughter, recalled the moment she learned of it. Her mother had called, urging her to come over with her brother. She found her parents quietly sitting on the sofa. The revelation that her father was in custody, suspected of planning the burglary, felt surreal. She couldn't believe it. Most of the family, apart from Françoise, refused to believe the allegations. Françoise described feeling isolated and conflicted. Meanwhile, their eldest son, Olivier, began to entertain the grim possibility that his father could indeed have staged the incident. The family found itself divided. The investigation continued. The confessions of the burglars had not directly linked Daniel to the crime. They did not personally know him or the property, which meant someone had to act as a middleman, a connection that investigators were determined to uncover. Investigators widened their inquiry by examining the phone activity of the burglars. Patterns quickly emerged. One of the burglars had frequent contacts with a man named Richard Liot, a longtime acquaintance of Daniel and Françoise Malgouyres. Liot and his partner regularly performed equestrian shows at the couple's property, the Jardin de Saint-Adrien, and he had been considered a trusted friend of the family. Closer scrutiny revealed that Liot's finances were unstable, his horse business struggling to stay afloat. Detectives began to suspect that he might have been motivated by personal gain and could have had a role in orchestrating the break-in. Authorities soon arrested both Jean-Pierre Bruneau, the father of one of the burglars, and Richard Liot. Bruneau remained silent, offering nothing to investigators. Liot initially insisted that any connection to the burglars' movements was coincidental, but under further questioning about his knowledge of Daniel's personal life, he admitted being aware of the affair Daniel was having with Yolanda, referring to her mistakenly as Brazilian. This strange misidentification made investigators believe Liot had likely passed on specific instructions to the burglars. Was he merely a messenger, or the true architect of the attack? That question weighed heavily on investigators. During a formal confrontation, Daniel remained composed, confident that no evidence tied him directly to the crime. Liot, however, eventually broke down and confessed involvement, stating that he had acted at Daniel's request. According to him, Daniel had wanted to intimidate Françoise into leaving the home so he could secure the property and start a new life with Yolanda. Liot's admission also revealed that Daniel had promised to help him with his debts in exchange for cooperation. Consequently, Richard Liot faced charges for complicity in theft and membership in a criminal organization. During a direct confrontation, Daniel maintained his composure, confident there was no proof against him. Liot, under mounting pressure, eventually broke down and admitted his role. He said he had acted at Daniel's request, a confession that aligned with the burglar's previous statements. Overwhelmed with emotion, finally weeping as the weight of his admission sank in, Daniel reacted with shock and anger, accusing his friend of betrayal, but making a puzzling remark that no evidence could be found. Liot explained that he had only agreed to help because Daniel had pleaded with him, promising financial support in exchange for cooperation. The plan, according to Liot, was intended to scare Françoise into leaving the home so Daniel could claim the property for himself. Liot was subsequently charged with complicity in theft and participation in a criminal organization. At this stage, it appeared Daniel had orchestrated the burglary, but the case took another unexpected turn. In April 2018, investigators in Nîmes uncovered new information about a gang from Grenoble under surveillance for organized crime. These men had been spotted near the Malgouyres estate a week before the attack. When questioned, they revealed that Liot had approached them, claiming that his friend's husband, Daniel, was about to abscond with his mistress and all his money. The gang refused the job, noting that Liot never mentioned Daniel as the mastermind. This new revelation cast doubt on whether Daniel had truly planned the attack or if Liot had manipulated the situation. When the trial began in November 2021, Daniel faced accusations of murder and orchestrating the burglary, while Richard Liot and Jean-Pierre Bruno were charged as accomplices. Daniel's defense argued he had been set up by a desperate and envious friend. Prosecutors countered that he had orchestrated the crime to intimidate his wife and seize her assets. Daniel Malgouyres reportedly told police during an investigation that he suspected his son Olivier was the mastermind behind a home invasion incident. According to a report, Malgouyres stated that his relationship with his son was strained, suggesting this as a motive. He later reportedly retracted this accusation. After 3 weeks of proceedings, prosecutors demanded 30 years for Daniel and 18 years for his alleged collaborators. Following 11 hours of deliberation, the court delivered its verdict. Daniel was found guilty of commissioning the burglary and sentenced to 18 years in prison. Richard Liot received 8 years and Bruno 7. The verdict left the family reeling. Françoise, overwhelmed by the betrayal and loss, reflected on the devastating impact of the events, living with someone for decades, only to discover such deception and the lasting scar it would leave on their children and family. Aurélie Malgouyres, Daniel's daughter, publicly supported her father, insisting she believed in his innocence and that he had acted in self-defense during the terrifying home invasion. In a 2022 appeal trial, his sentence was reduced to 15 years, and he was acquitted of the charge of having organized the ambush, but still found guilty of the murder of the burglar, as the jury determined it was not self-defense. After serving 7.5 years in prison, Malgouyres, now 76, was released on parole in May 2025. In France, as in many judicial systems, time spent in custody awaiting trial and during the appeal process, pre-trial detention, is credited towards any eventual prison sentence. He expressed a mix of pleasure at being free and difficulty with the emotional toll of the experience, stating, "We destroyed a lot of things during all these years, with false accusations. My family, my childhood dream, with this garden that was taken from me. He is currently in the process of divorcing his wife, who has retained ownership of the garden. And what do you all think about this case? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Until next time.